For 3 years, Hannah Miller believed she had the kind of marriage most women only dreamed about. The kind where your husband's eyes still lit up when you walked into the room. The kind where his hand always found yours in crowded places, like a reflex he couldn't control. Friends told her constantly how lucky she was. And she believed them. Why wouldn't she? They lived in a modest house on the outskirts of Duluth, Minnesota, with a backyard that sloped gently toward a line of whispering pines. Their evenings followed comfortable rhythms that felt unshakable. Jonathan would come home from work, drop his keys into the same ceramic bowl by the door, kiss her forehead, and ask what was for dinner. He laughed easily, worked hard, and swore that weekends belonged to them. So when Jonathan mentioned a fishing trip with his college buddies, Brian Collins, Scott Edwards, and Kevin Brooks, Hannah didn't hesitate for a second. These were men he'd known for over a decade, guys who'd shared hunting blinds and campfire stories across northern Minnesota. Fishing trips were their sacred tradition. The night before he left, Jonathan's eyes sparkled like a kid who'd just been handed one more summer adventure. "We'll be up near Lake Superior," he said, tossing a sleeping bag into the bed of his truck. "The old log cabin in the pines, just us, the fire, and the lake." He paused, smiling at her. "Don't worry if I don't have service. Half the time those woods are a complete dead zone." Hannah kissed him goodbye at the door. "Have fun," she told him. "Catch something worth bragging about." He grinned wide, pulled her into a quick embrace, and then he was gone, the rumble of his truck fading into the distance until the house fell completely still. That first day alone passed unbearably slow. Hannah cleaned every surface, reorganized the pantry shelves, even started a podcast she'd been meaning to try. But the silence pressed against her like a physical weight. She hadn't realized how much of her daily rhythm depended on Jonathan's presence, the clatter of his boots in the entryway, the way he whistled off-key while shaving, the comforting heaviness of his arm draped across her waist as they fell asleep. By evening, the house felt cavernous. She microwaved leftovers, sat alone at the table, and found herself wishing desperately for the sound of his voice. As dusk painted the windows gold and purple, Hannah leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping tea, when the thought arrived quietly but with absolute certainty. Tomorrow was Jonathan's birthday. They'd planned a small celebration for when he returned. But why wait? Why not drive up and surprise him? She pictured his face lighting up when she appeared at the cabin door, arms loaded with his favorite foods. The image warmed her more with every passing second. The decision rooted itself deep. Early the next morning, Hannah tied her hair back, pulled on an apron, and threw open the pantry doors. The kitchen soon filled with the comforting chaos of preparation. She started with dessert because dessert mattered most to Jonathan: apple pie, her mother's recipe. Thick slices of tart apples tossed in cinnamon and sugar, laid carefully into a golden, buttery crust. She rolled the dough with practiced hands, crimped the edges just so, brushed cream across the top, and slid it into the oven. While the pie baked, she turned to the main course. Chicken wings seasoned with paprika, garlic, and cayenne. Jonathan loved them crispy, the skin blistered and golden brown. She lined 2 baking sheets, cranked the temperature high, and let the heat work its magic. The kitchen filled with mouthwatering aromas, the sharp bite of spices mingling with the sweeter scent of cinnamon and baked apples. On the stovetop, a pot of hearty vegetable soup simmered. She diced onions, carrots, and celery, stirring them into rich broth until steam fogged the window above the sink. October mornings in Minnesota carried a serious bite, and she knew the guys would welcome something warm after hours spent by the frigid lake. She baked soft dinner rolls too, brushing them with melted butter until they gleamed. Between timer buzzes, she cleaned as she went, humming along with the radio, completely lost in the rhythm of love made tangible through food. She imagined Jonathan's friends gathered around the rustic table, their jaws dropping when she walked through the door. She pictured Jonathan's arms opening wide, the pride glowing in his eyes as he told them, "My wife drove all this way just to bring us dinner." By noon, the kitchen looked like Thanksgiving had arrived early. Cooling racks held golden pie and pillowy rolls. Containers of steaming soup lined the counter. Aluminum foil covered the trays of perfectly crispy wings. Hannah pulled out a large thermal tote and began packing everything with care. Pie wrapped in clean towels, soup ladled into sturdy jars, rolls stacked in neat layers, wings sealed tight. She added napkins, plates, utensils, even a thermos of fresh coffee. The bag felt heavy in her hands, but it was a satisfying weight, as though it carried not just food but intention, devotion, and love. When she zipped the tote closed, Hannah stepped back and let quiet satisfaction wash over her. Tomorrow would be Jonathan's birthday, and she was about to make it one he'd never forget. The next morning broke pale and bitter cold, thin mist curling above the rooftops like ghostly ribbons. Hannah loaded the thermal tote into her backseat, double-checked that nothing would spill, and slid behind the wheel. She tightened her scarf against the chill, started the engine, and watched her breath cloud the windshield before the heater finally kicked in. Nervous excitement fluttered between her ribs, making the gray morning feel electric with possibility. The first miles were simple, paved roads cutting through Duluth's outer edges, past shuttered diners and half-empty parking lots. But soon the asphalt gave way to Chelan County backroads lined with birch and towering pines. The leaves had already turned, painting the canopy in brilliant bands of orange, crimson, and gold, the kind of autumn color that made northern Minnesota feel like another world entirely. The sky stretched hard and brilliant blue above her. The air tasted crisp and clean. Hannah cracked her window just enough to let in the intoxicating scent of pine needles and damp earth. She glanced at her phone, 1 bar remaining. She knew from past trips that the final stretch toward Lake Superior's inland cabins offered no cell service whatsoever. Jonathan had mentioned it countless times, half complaining, half amused. Dead zone up there. You could disappear and nobody'd know till Monday. Hannah smiled faintly at the memory. This time, she thought, he'd be the one getting surprised. The road narrowed dramatically, twisting deeper into dense forest. Ruts jolted the car, forcing her to slow to a careful crawl. She gripped the wheel firmly as branches arched overhead like skeletal fingers and shadows flickered across her windshield. Somewhere beyond these trees, she imagined the cabin waiting, Jonathan and his friends probably still groggy from a late night, not expecting anyone, least of all her with a bag of food still warm enough to steam in the frigid air. Her heart beat faster. She pictured Jonathan's expression when he opened that door. First confusion, then pure delight, maybe even a little embarrassment in front of his buddies. But the good kind, the kind that proved she'd gone completely out of her way because she loved him. The thought warmed her cheeks. The car climbed a slight rise, then leveled out. Ahead, the forest opened into a small clearing used for parking. Hannah slowed, expecting to see the usual lineup of familiar vehicles: Jonathan's aging truck, Brian's SUV with its dented bumper, Scott's weathered Jeep, Kevin's rusty minivan. Instead, she slammed the brakes so hard her seatbelt locked. Parked in the clearing were vehicles she'd never seen before. A brand new pickup gleamed in the thin sunlight, spotless and expensive, looking like it had rolled straight off a dealer's lot. Beside it sat a bright red sports car, low-slung and utterly impractical for roads like these. A small city coupe completed the row, its paint polished to a mirror shine, its tires far too clean to have traveled any distance on rutted dirt. For a moment, Hannah wondered if she'd taken a wrong turn. She checked the landmarks automatically. The familiar curve of the tree line, the old split rail fence sagging at the clearing's edge, the narrow track leading deeper into the woods. No mistake. This was absolutely the place, the same clearing Jonathan had described, the same one she remembered from a summer years ago when she joined them for a day. She killed the engine. Silence crashed down inside the car, heavy and absolute. Then from somewhere in the distance, the forest carried a sound that didn't belong here. A bass line pounding, relentless. It thudded through the trees like a heartbeat. Not the gentle strum of an acoustic guitar around a campfire, not the comfortable rumble of men's voices telling old stories. This was pulsing electronic music, the kind meant for nightclubs, not remote cabins. Hannah sat frozen, her hand still resting on the keys. The thermal toad on the backseat suddenly felt absurd, almost mocking in its wholesome domestic weight. She strained to listen. The sounds grew clearer. Along with the thumping bass came laughter, high-pitched, shrill, unmistakably female. The kind of laughter that tumbled over itself, bright and careless, completely wrong for the story she'd been telling herself during the long drive north. Her pulse quickened violently. Something was very wrong. The air outside looked exactly the same. The trees stood where they'd always been. But the clearing felt altered somehow, warped, like she'd driven into a parallel dimension. Hannah's grip tightened on the steering wheel, then slowly released. With deliberate care, she reached for the door handle, her ears still straining toward the music and feminine laughter echoing from the woods ahead. What she had imagined, a birthday surprise wrapped in warmth and love, suddenly wavered like a mirage, replaced by cold unease she couldn't yet name. Hannah stepped out of the car, the forest chill wrapping around her like a damp shroud. She left the tote of food on the backseat, its weight suddenly unbearable, and closed the door softly so the sound wouldn't carry. The pounding music was unmistakable now, vibrating through the tree trunks, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the sharp pop of bottles being opened. Every step she took seemed impossibly loud, the crunch of gravel beneath her shoes echoing in her ears like gunshots. She followed the narrow path toward the cabin, a route she knew from memory. Branches scraped against her jacket as she moved, and with each footfall her heart hammered harder against her ribs. She told herself there had to be an explanation. Maybe other campers had rented a nearby cabin. Maybe she was imagining things. But when the trees finally parted and the cabin came into view, her breath caught hard in her throat. Light poured from every window, unnaturally bright against the fading afternoon. This wasn't the soft flicker of lanterns or the warm amber glow of a wood stove. This was harsh electric light, glaring and artificial, throwing long shadows across the clearing. Music thudded from inside, bass reverberating against the wooden walls so powerfully she could feel it in her chest. The old cabin she remembered had transformed into something strange and unrecognizable. Hannah crept closer, each step painfully deliberate, as though the frozen earth itself might betray her if she moved too quickly. She reached one of the side windows where a curtain hung half open and pressed her face to the icy glass. She looked inside. Her world shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The room, usually cluttered with fishing gear and smelling of pine smoke and coffee, had been transformed into absolute chaos. The table was buried under bottles of whiskey, vodka, and champagne, some half empty, others toppled onto their sides in sticky puddles. Cigarette smoke hung in the air like fog. A cheap disco light spun wildly in one corner, painting the log walls in lurid, pulsing colors. And at the center of it all sat Jonathan. He was sprawled across the sagging couch, a half-empty champagne bottle on the table before him. On his lap, perched there like she belonged, sat a young blonde woman in a crop top and tiny denim shorts. Her head rested against his shoulder, his arm wrapped casually around her waist. His mouth hovered close to her ear as he whispered something that made her throw her head back and laugh, exposing a tanned, toned stomach when her shirt rode up. Jonathan grinned, kissed the crown of her hair, tapped her hip possessively. Hannah's breath hitched violently, but no sound escaped her frozen lips. Her gaze darted desperately around the room, and the nightmare only deepened with every inch. Brian, the one who always spoke so proudly about his wife Emily and their little boy, had his arms wrapped around two women at once, pulling one close by the back of her neck while the other pressed against his side, giggling. Scott, who constantly complained about migraines and exhaustion whenever his wife suggested date nights, had a dark-haired woman pinned against the wall, his mouth buried in her neck, his hands roaming her body without any shame whatsoever. Kevin, usually so withdrawn and aloof at family gatherings, was suddenly animated and alive, his hand disappearing beneath the hem of another woman's skirt as she shrieked with delighted laughter. The cabin had become a den of betrayal, nothing remotely resembling the fishing retreat Hannah had been led to believe in for years. The pounding music, the reek of alcohol, the shrill laughter of women draped over men who were supposed to be devoted husbands and fathers. It all blurred together into a grotesque mockery of the life she thought she knew. Hannah felt her chest constrict as though an iron band had suddenly wrapped around her ribs and was tightening with every heartbeat. She pressed harder against the glass, needing to be absolutely certain, needing to burn every detail permanently into her memory. But the more she witnessed, the more her insides seemed to hollow out completely. Her vision sharpened with unnatural, almost cruel clarity. Angle of Jonathan's hand against the blonde's hip, the gleam of sweat on Scott's temple, the predatory hunger lighting up Kevin's eyes. Her body trembled violently, but not with anger. Not yet. This was the cold, paralyzing shock of complete betrayal, the kind that turns blood to ice water and makes time itself seem to stop. Her mind screamed at her to burst through the door, to throw it open and demand answers, to unleash years of trust now proven worthless. But her body refused to obey. She stood rooted to the spot, silent and invisible, a ghost haunting the ruins of her own life. The toad of food she'd prepared with such love flashed through her mind. The apple pie wrapped carefully in a clean towel. The soup sealed tight against the autumn chill. The wings, the rolls, the coffee, now it all seemed obscene, laughable, a cruel joke she'd unknowingly played on herself. For an endless moment she felt absolutely nothing, no tears, no rage, only the suffocating weight of disbelief. The sounds of the party reached her through the glass, distorted and dreamlike, as though she were trapped behind an invisible barrier. She wanted desperately to look away, but her eyes remained fixed, compelled to witness the complete destruction of everything she'd believed was safe and real. And still she made no sound. No fury, only silence. Hannah didn't move at first. Her palms stayed flattened against the frozen window pane, the cold seeping into her bones, strangely grounding her even as the world inside continued its chaotic spiral. Then slowly, as if guided by pure instinct rather than conscious thought, she slid her phone from her jacket pocket. Her fingers moved without trembling. She tapped the camera icon, switched to video mode, and raised the device until the lens captured the scene within. Through the glass, the phone recorded everything with damning clarity. Jonathan leaning close to the blonde, whispering something that made her laugh until tears glistened in her eyes. Brian dancing clumsily with two women pressed against him, his hands wandering freely across their bodies. Scott pinning the brunette to the wall, their mouths locked together as his fingers gripped her hips. Kevin sprawled in a chair, grinning wolfishly as his hand disappeared beneath fabric. The camera lingered on each of them in turn, steady and ruthlessly deliberate. Hannah panned slowly across the entire room, documenting the debris of depravity. Bottles scattered everywhere, ashtrays overflowing with cigarette butts, clothing strewn carelessly across the floor. The throb of bass vibrated faintly through the glass, an ugly soundtrack underscoring the complete destruction of every promise Jonathan had ever made. She held the phone perfectly still. Each frame was evidence, each face fully exposed under the harsh artificial light. She zoomed in on Jonathan's hand resting possessively on the blonde's waist, then shifted to the champagne bottle glinting beside them. Nothing was left ambiguous. When she was absolutely certain she'd recorded enough long, uninterrupted minutes of undeniable betrayal, Hannah finally lowered the phone. Her breath briefly fogged the glass, momentarily obscuring the sordid scene. Then she turned away. The walk back to her car felt endless, each step weighted with lead. Her legs were stiff, her movements mechanical, but she didn't falter. She opened the back door, glanced at the thermal tote still sitting on the seat, and left it there untouched. The smell of roasted chicken, sweet pie, and fresh-baked rolls now seemed grotesque. Obscene. She closed the door with careful precision, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The road out of the woods stretched before her in a blur. Headlights cut narrow tunnels through the darkening trees, illuminating branches that seemed to claw at the night sky. She drove in complete silence, the distant echo of that pounding music still reverberating somewhere in her skull, though she was already miles away. Her grip on the steering wheel was rigid, white-knuckled, but her mind had become startlingly, almost frighteningly clear. Back home, Hannah parked in the driveway and sat motionless for a long time, staring at the house she'd once considered her sanctuary. The thermal tote remained abandoned in the backseat. She didn't bother retrieving it. Instead, she walked directly to the living room, set her phone on the coffee table, and sank into the couch. The oppressive quiet of the empty house pressed around her, thick and suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. The ache came then, sharp and deep. Images replayed on an endless loop in her mind. Jonathan's satisfied grin as he kissed the blonde's hair. Brian's hands clutching two women simultaneously. Scott's body pressing the brunette against that wall. Kevin's hungry laughter. Her stomach clenched like she'd swallowed broken glass, but even as the pain rose like a drowning tide, something colder and harder surfaced alongside it. Reason, calculation, a crystalline clarity forged in the white heat of shock. Hannah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, though no tears had actually fallen. She reached for her laptop. All night she worked without pause. The video played on loop as she froze frames, zoomed in on faces, captured screenshots. She opened browser tab after browser tab, methodically combing through social media profiles with the precision of a detective. A distinctive necklace caught in one frame became a clue, leading her to Christina, a university student whose post overflowed with glamorous selfies and vague hints about seeking a generous sponsor. A tattoo visible on another woman's shoulder revealed Lara, a dancer at a Duluth nightclub whose online presence screamed availability. Brightly painted acrylic nails led her to Elena, a nail technician who brazenly flaunted designer handbags and luxury vacations far beyond any technician's salary. In the last one, the aggressive brunette with strings of provocative photos was Dasha. Her captions dripped with arrogance and entitlement. Each discovery tightened the knot in Hannah's chest, but simultaneously sharpened her resolve like a blade against a whetstone. She copied profile links, saved screenshots, wrote down phone numbers carelessly listed in public bios. Hours evaporated. The clock ticked steadily toward dawn, but she felt no exhaustion. Only the steady, relentless hum of purpose driving her forward. By the time the first gray light filtered through the blinds, Hannah had assembled a complete, devastating picture. 4 husbands who had lied for years, 4 women who had stepped willingly into their orbit, and herself standing at the center of it all, holding the explosive truth in her hands. The pain hadn't left her. It sat heavy in her chest, a weight she knew she'd carry for a long time. But above it, colder and infinitely stronger, rose iron determination. She would not scream, she would not beg, she would not break. She had a plan. By mid-morning, Hannah sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, the weak light of a cloudy Minnesota day filtering through the blinds. Her phone rested beside her, screen dark, waiting. She hadn't slept a single minute. Instead, she'd spent the entire night pulling together every fragment of information she'd uncovered: profiles, photos, names, phone numbers. All of it led to this moment. She reached for a second phone, a prepaid burner she'd purchased years ago for emergencies, completely untraceable to her name. With it, she created a brand new account, anonymous and blank. Her hands moved with clinical precision, stripped of any hesitation. She opened the Messenger app, tapped Create Group, and typed the title in crisp, deliberate letters. OUR Fishermen. One by one, she added the participants. Emily Collins, Brian's trusting wife, mother to their young son. Heather Edwards, married to Scott, who believed his constant headaches and late nights were legitimate. Claire Brooks, Kevin's steady, patient wife who had stood by him through years of financial struggle. And then the women from the video: Christina, the blonde who'd sat in Jonathan's lap. Laura, the nightclub dancer. Elena, the nail technician with inexplicable designer accessories. And Dasha, the brunette who flaunted herself online without shame. 8 women total, all connected by the elaborate lies of 4 men. Hannah scrolled to the video file, tapped once, sent, no words, no explanation, just the raw, unfiltered truth delivered without comment. For several moments the chat remained silent. A single checkmark appeared, then two. Hannah imagined notifications buzzing in offices, kitchens, dorm rooms, nightclub dressing rooms. She pictured each woman tapping her screen, waiting as the video buffered, watching their expressions transform as the images played. The first message exploded from Christina. "What is this? Who are you?" Lara followed seconds later. "This better be some stupid joke. Where did you get this?" Then Emily's response cut through like a serrated blade. "Brian, what the hell is going on?" Heather's message arrived in furious capital letters. "Scott, answer me, what is this nightmare?" Claire's response was shorter but no less lethal. "Kevin, is this you?" The chat detonated. Christina again frantic. "Delete this now, you can't send this around. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Dasha threatening. "Whoever you are, this is illegal, you'll regret this, I'll sue you into oblivion." Elena tried desperately to defend herself. "I didn't know he was married, he told me he was single." "Swear," Emily responded with fury that practically bled through the screen. "Don't you dare play innocent, that's my husband, the father of my child, you all disgust me." "Heather, I'm coming home right now, Scott, if you don't explain yourself, don't bother being there when I arrive." Claire, "So this is what our weekends really look like. Fishing trips, you pathetic lying coward." Messages flew so rapidly the notifications blurred into a continuous stream. Accusations, denials, threats. Christina insisting it was somehow a setup. Laura swearing they were just hanging out. Elena begging to be believed. Dasha threatening expensive lawsuits. The wives were absolutely merciless, their words sharp as surgical instruments, eviscerating their husbands and the women who had shared that cabin. "Emily, I should have known. You always had an excuse. Now I see why. You've humiliated us all." Heather, "Scott, you're finished. Do you understand me? Finished." Claire, "Kevin, you've lost everything. Don't even bother coming home." The group chat transformed into a perfect digital storm, messages stacking faster than Hannah could possibly read, the screen filling with rage and panic and shattered illusions. But she didn't need to follow every line. The outcome was already written in stone. She sat back in her chair, face completely expressionless, watching the chaos unfold like a detached observer at a theater production. The anger, the panic, the lies unraveling in real time. It was no longer her burden alone to carry. She had passed the crushing weight to the people who needed to see it, and now it was destroying them instead. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. The chorus of rage and betrayal echoed in digital form. Hannah didn't flinch. She closed her laptop halfway, folded her arms across her chest, and stared out the window at the gray, indifferent sky. The truth was loose now. It could never be taken back, and she felt nothing but cold, steady, absolute calm. By the following morning, the house sat quiet as a tomb, late autumn light pressing weakly through the curtains. Hannah occupied the living room, a coffee mug cooling in her hands, a book open but completely unread across her lap. She'd barely slept, her mind too sharp, too electrically awake. The phone rested on the table, the group chat still burning with furious messages. The sound of the front door opening shattered the stillness. Jonathan stepped inside, boots heavy on the welcome mat. He looked disheveled but somehow satisfied, his jacket carrying the faint smell of campfire smoke and cheap beer. "Hannah, I'm home," he called out, voice bright with misplaced triumph. He dropped his duffel bag near the door, stretched luxuriously, and flashed his familiar grin. "You wouldn't believe the weekend we had, best fishing trip in years. The fish were practically jumping into the boat." Hannah didn't rise from the couch, she didn't smile. She turned a page in her book with deliberate, almost theatrical slowness. "Hello, Jonathan," she said, her voice utterly flat. He blinked at her tone, clearly confused. He'd expected warmth, the usual welcoming kiss, eager questions, maybe laughter at his exaggerated fish stories. Instead, her voice carried all the emotional warmth of a weather forecast. He stepped closer, searching her face with growing unease. "What's wrong? You don't sound happy to see me." Hannah looked up then. Her eyes had transformed, cold and hard, completely stripped of every softness he'd ever relied upon. "Did you enjoy your time with Christina?" The name landed like a grenade detonating in the silence. Jonathan froze mid-step. The color drained from his face instantly, leaving him gray and ashen. His mouth opened, but no words emerged, only a strangled, choking sound that died somewhere in his throat. Hannah closed her book with quiet finality, set it neatly on the table, and reached for her phone. She unlocked it with a single swipe and held the glowing screen toward him. The group chat blazed with messages, lines of accusations and threats filling every inch of visible space. His eyes darted frantically across the words, widening with horror at each new line. Emily's volcanic rage, Heather's murderous fury, Claire's ice-cold betrayal. The panic, desperate pleas from Christina and the others. Jonathan's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. He scrolled with trembling hands, faster and faster. The truth was inescapable, every face exposed, every name revealed, every filthy secret laid bare in one devastating digital space. His entire carefully constructed life unraveled before his eyes in the space of a few glowing paragraphs. How? He whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking. How did this happen? I showed them, Hannah replied with perfect calm. I recorded what I saw, I created the chat. I didn't add any explanations, Jonathan, just the truth, the rest. You and your friends managed that spectacular destruction entirely on your own. He collapsed onto the couch as though his legs had simply stopped working. His face sagged, his eyes glazed with naked panic. Please, Hannah, let me explain. It wasn't what it looked like. I made mistakes, yes, terrible mistakes, but I can fix this. Don't leave me, don't throw away everything we've built. Her gaze never wavered, not even a flicker. Explain what exactly? That the fishing trips were elaborate lies from the beginning, that your precious brotherhood with Brian and Scott and Kevin was nothing but cover for weekends exactly like this one? She shook her head slowly. No, Jonathan, I don't need your explanations, I need space and a lawyer. He reached for her desperately, his movements jerky with panic. Don't do this, please don't end it like this. I love you, I've always loved you. We can get past this. We can go to counseling. We can. Hannah rose to her feet. She slipped the wedding ring from her finger and placed it on the table beside her keys with a soft, final click that seemed to echo through the entire house. You ended it, she said quietly. I'm just giving it the name it deserves. She picked up her bag, walked to the door, and opened it without a single backward glance. Jonathan's voice cracked behind her, calling her name, begging, pleading. But she never turned around. The door closed with a soft, definitive click, leaving him alone in the suffocating silence of a house that would never feel like home again. Jonathan remained slumped on the couch long after Hannah's departure, the echo of that closing door still reverberating through his hollow chest. His phone vibrated relentlessly on the table, buzzing with incoming calls and frantic messages he couldn't bear to face. When he finally gathered enough courage to look, the screen blazed with the names of his supposed brothers, Brian, Scott, Kevin, each calling in escalating panic. He answered at last, his voice completely hollow. Brian. A torrent of furious shouting exploded from the other end before he could say another word. What the hell did you do, Jonathan? My wife has the video. Emily is screaming at me. She's packing her bags right now. You're the one who brought those girls. You started all of this. Jonathan tried to protest, his throat raw and aching. No, I didn't. Don't blame me. You were all there. You were worse than me. Another call broke through. Scott's voice erupted before Jonathan could even form a complete thought. Heather is done with me. She's throwing my stuff out on the front lawn. She says she's calling a divorce lawyer first thing tomorrow morning. This is your fault, Jonathan. If you hadn't let someone film, then Kevin's voice joined the chaos, shaking with fury. Claire is gone. She took the kids. She emptied our joint accounts. She says she'll fight for every last dollar. We trusted you, Jonathan. We trusted you to keep this quiet. The line dissolved into overlapping accusations as each man desperately scrambled to shift blame. They shouted over each other, their decade-long friendship disintegrating in real time. Years of supposed loyalty collapsed beneath the crushing weight of exposed betrayal, each one clawing frantically to escape responsibility. Jonathan clutched his phone with sweating hands. It wasn't me, he cried weakly, but the words sounded pathetic and hollow even to his own ears. They didn't care about the truth. They only needed someone to blame, and he was the most convenient target. Outside their frantic, accusatory calls, the consequences spread like uncontrollable wildfire. Emily Collins wasted absolutely no time. By week's end, she had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences with an extensive evidence package attached. She packed her son's belongings, permanently vacated the marital home, and took her devastatingly thorough case to court. Brian had once been a respected partner in a successful local construction firm, but Emily's swift, surgical legal action left him cornered with nowhere to run. She demanded full custody of their son, half of all shared assets, and a significant stake in his company. The community sided with her unanimously. Brian's colleagues distanced themselves immediately, no one willing to be professionally associated with such toxic scandal. His reputation evaporated overnight. Heather Edwards proved equally merciless. She physically threw Scott out of their home the very night she saw the video. Neighbors watched with undisguised interest as his belongings were unceremoniously dumped onto the front porch, whispered speculation trailing behind every box and garbage bag. She refused to cover his mounting debts any longer, leaving him suddenly saddled with car payments, maxed credit cards, and a mortgage he couldn't possibly handle alone. Within days, his entire financial foundation crumbled into dust. Claire Brooks was the quietest of the three wives, but her silence proved absolutely lethal. She filed meticulous legal paperwork dividing every shared asset down to the final cent, their beloved lake house, their retirement savings, even Kevin's cherished hunting cabin. Everything was either liquidated or surgically split. Then she took their children and relocated to her parents' house 2 towns over. By the time Kevin fully comprehended what was happening, Claire had already finalized every arrangement with her attorney. The battle was over before it began. The tight-knit community surrounding Duluth buzzed with scandal for weeks afterward. Word traveled at lightning speed through church groups, grocery store checkout lines, PTA meetings, and office break rooms. Everyone had either seen the video directly or heard extensively detailed accounts. Some had even received it forwarded from anonymous numbers, spreading the evidence wider still. The four men who had once boasted so casually about their legendary fishing trips became objects of universal disgust and open mockery. Brian found himself shunned by business partners who no longer trusted his judgment or his character. Scott's coworkers whispered constantly behind his back, their professional respect completely evaporated. Kevin, once quietly admired for his stoic reliability, now found himself both pitied and ridiculed in equal measure. And Jonathan, he bore the heaviest burden of all. With Hannah gone, the scandal tied directly and permanently to his name, he became the public face of their collective disgrace. His reputation disintegrated completely overnight, leaving nothing but ashes. The brotherhood they'd once believed unshakable, held together by years of shared secrets and mutual protection, splintered beyond any hope of repair. No one defended anyone else. Instead, they pointed accusing fingers in every direction, each man loudly insisting someone else had been responsible for inviting the women, for supplying the alcohol, for letting things spiral so catastrophically out of control. Their bond, once their impenetrable shield, dissolved into worthless ash. In every corner of their carefully constructed lives, doors slammed permanently closed. Wives departed with children in tow. Bank accounts were frozen and divided. Businesses faltered or failed outright. Reputations that had taken decades to build turned to irretrievable dust overnight. And in the devastating aftermath, all four men found themselves utterly alone, each abandoned to the comprehensive ruin they had authored together. The fishing trips that had once promised freedom, excitement, and unbreakable camaraderie had become their complete undoing, the elaborate mask ripped away for the entire world to witness what festered beneath. Within 1 week of that catastrophic weekend, Hannah filed for divorce at the county courthouse in Duluth. The process in Minnesota was remarkably straightforward. No fault, the official documents labeled it, citing an irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. But behind that sterile legal terminology stood evidence so comprehensive and undeniable that Jonathan couldn't mount even the most basic defense. The video existed on 3 separate devices, backed up securely to the cloud, and had already spread in ways that could never be reversed or contained. It was more than sufficient to tilt any negotiation decisively in Hannah's favor. Her attorney submitted the petition with quiet, professional efficiency. The request was simple and direct. An equitable division of all marital assets, exactly as Minnesota law required. Half the house, half the savings, half of everything they had built together across 3 years of marriage. Jonathan could theoretically protest, but he possessed absolutely no leverage. His friends' imploding marriages had already established devastating precedent, and the stain of his documented actions had become embarrassingly public knowledge throughout the entire community. He signed the settlement because there was literally nothing else he could do. When the divorce decree was finally stamped and filed, the life Jonathan had once claimed as his own unraveled with shocking completeness. The house that had once contained laughter and genuine warmth no longer belonged to him. His bank accounts were divided according to strict legal formula. His personal possessions were inventoried and cataloged. His name carried permanent tarnish in every professional and social circle that had once mattered to him. The men he had called brothers for over a decade now avoided him completely, far too consumed with their own individual wreckage to offer any form of support or solidarity. What had begun as unshakable camaraderie ended in bitter, isolated silence, each man stranded alone in his private disgrace. Jonathan moved into a cramped rental apartment near the industrial edge of town. The place had peeling paint, paper-thin walls, and a persistent smell of mildew, a pathetic far cry from the comfortable home he had shared with Hannah. Neighbors in the building regarded him with barely disguised wariness, knowing whispers following him through dim hallways and fluorescent-lit grocery store aisles. At work, colleagues stopped including him in important meetings, their trust permanently evaporated. He carried himself like a man who had aged decades in mere weeks, hunched and gray, every step weighted with visible defeat. For Hannah, the ending brought no sense of triumph. There was no rush of vindictive satisfaction, no swell of victorious pleasure. Instead, there was silence, a heavy, cleansing silence that replaced the constant background hum of doubt she had unknowingly carried for months, perhaps years. She didn't celebrate Jonathan's fall from grace. She simply acknowledged it as the inevitable consequence of choices he had freely made. She packed her belongings with calm, methodical deliberation. Each sealed box felt like a finished chapter, not destroyed but properly completed. Friends stopped by with casseroles and quiet company. Neighbors offered steady, unobtrusive support. Her family called frequently, their voices carrying reassurance she hadn't realized she desperately needed. For the first time in years, Hannah felt no compulsion to explain herself. No urge to defend a marriage against fractures she had stubbornly refused to acknowledge. On a crystalline November morning, she walked through the house one final time. The walls still held memories, some tender, others achingly painful, but they no longer imprisoned her. She placed her keys on the kitchen counter, switched off the lights, and closed the door firmly behind her. In that small, unremarkable act, she stepped across a threshold into a future she could finally shape according to her own design. There were moments when grief ambushed her, sharp and uninvited. Nights when the bed stretched impossibly wide and empty. Mornings when the profound quiet pressed uncomfortably against her ears. But even during those difficult moments, a deeper current ran steady beneath the surface. Relief. She was free from the constant, invisible threat of betrayal. Free from lies delivered with convincing smiles. Free from a man who had repeatedly chosen deception over devotion. Hannah discovered unexpected solace in simple routines. She returned to work with renewed energy and focus. She resurrected hobbies she had abandoned years ago. She allowed herself to dream without Jonathan's secrets casting shadows across every possibility. She began running along the lake shore each morning, the cold northern air stinging her cheeks pleasantly. Each mile became a tangible reminder that her strength had not been broken, only tested and proven. She cooked for herself again, not from obligation but from genuine joy, filling her small kitchen with beloved aromas and quiet satisfaction. She never once replayed the video. It had served its necessary purpose. The truth had been revealed. Justice had been delivered. Now she deliberately left it behind. Jonathan's ongoing downfall continued to circulate through the town's persistent gossip networks, but Hannah paid it no attention. His loss belonged entirely to him now. Wife, friends, reputation, stability, all systematically stripped away. He had constructed his entire life upon a foundation of deception, and when those lies finally collapsed, nothing remained standing. For Hannah, the path forward was no longer about revenge or vindication. It was about dignity reclaimed. She carried herself with quiet, unshakable confidence, secure in the knowledge that she had refused to be shattered by betrayal. Secure in knowing she had chosen difficult truth over comfortable illusion. The future stretched before her, vast, uncharted, and filled with genuine possibility. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, it felt completely, beautifully, undeniably hers.